listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show for you today. Starting off, I will make you aware of one of the cynical strategies that the Democratic Party is pursuing, congressional Democrats and presumptive presidential nominee Joe Biden against the Republicans and the Trump administration, and that this is actually showing gains. The argument I will make to you will be simultaneously depressing, pathetic, and based on the evidence that is most likely true. Next, we'll be discussing Senate hearings where Fauci will be the star. Now, the Trump administration blocked Fauci's testimony before the House Democrats, believing the Senate, under beady-eyed, ever-vigilant Republican Mitch McConnell, will be safer terrain. Well, it seems that Trump was right. Fauci did use the platform to warn of needless suffering and death, as he said he was going to do, but he basically stayed on message in a cut and dry hearing. Later in the first hour, we'll cover Biden's new attack ad that uses China as a wiffle ball bat to beat Donald Trump over the head. Next, we'll discuss the story brewing in California with Elon Musk ignoring the authorities to open his factory, basically daring the government to arrest him. Lord knows, I hope they oblige him. In the next hour, we'll get into the proliferation of facial recognition technology by police departments across the country. We'll also discuss the disturbing armed rally set to take place in Michigan on Thursday. There have been death threats that have been put out against the governor for people who are going to be attending this rally. Disturbing, to say the least. Last but not least, it's Tuesday. That means the most cultured segment on the network, Politics of Art. But let's start here. When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. And I, ever vigilant, with a rather strained relationship with my night bed, I covered several stories overnight until roughly 5 or 6 this morning. Now, during my research for the various stories covering everything from Rokana's laughable statement that Joe Biden will be the bridge to the progressive future, to CrowdStrike's bombshell admission about not having evidence that the emails were stolen from the DNC, to the staggering number of COVID-19 deaths in the heartland, the worst case found in Central City, Kentucky, with a 650% jump in infections over the course of the week. Now, something in the data jumped out at me. I postulated this about a month back, but the evidence is much more pressing now than it was back then, given the difference in time. For all the castigation on this show of the Democratic Party and the chosen warrior, bringer of rain, one Joe Biden, there is a grim, cynical strategy that is, while not determinative, is actually making gains on one Joe Biden. Now, you may be flabbergasted to believe that the Democratic Party was doing anything other than giving the opposition everything that they wanted, but if you look closer, there's more. As we speak, the party is busy maintaining their strategy to get Joe Biden elected right now. And that strategy, believe it or not, is in fact working. The Democratic Party basically gave the Republican Party everything that they wanted from the standpoint of policy. What I mean by that is everything that they had the opportunity to get from the Democratic Party, they got. They passed 4 stimulus bills, with the American public getting $1,200 and worker benefits. Many of the American public, or much of the American public, if I'm not mistaken, 70%, were not able to get those unemployment benefits, at least going back a week ago. I'm making the point that while giving Republicans everything, the Democratic Party, what they got out of it, especially if what they were trying to get out of it was something for the American public, was meager at best. The catch here is Trump, with this particular plan of throwing open the economy and bringing in, rejuvenating business back into this particular country, Trump is walking into a trap. Yes, the 1% wants the Democratic Party to keep this economy shut. And as such, they are not necessarily going to be giving the money and everything else. And Mitch McConnell has already made the point that we need to start focusing on the deficit, meaning anything else that Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party is planning at this point is basically off the table. But therein lies the, let's call it the genius of the plan. The plan is basically to do nothing. Joe Biden, in his basement, is basically running a race, hoping and assuming, believing that the Trump administration will lose on their own. Understand what I mean here. As opposed to Joe Biden making any real affirmative argument about why you should vote for Joe Biden is basically making no argument at all. Yes, he's saying vote for him. Yes, every so often he's attacking Trump. But basically, Joe Biden, with the exception of the interview that he had this morning, is running from his basement. And as running from his basement, you would think that there would be an impossible task in order to unseat a sitting president. And yet, this particular sitting president is criminally incompetent. And because he is criminally incompetent, allowing him enough rope to basically hang himself seems to be the strategy that the Democratic Party is running with. In the beginning, I wasn't sure if they were incompetent. I wasn't sure if they, over the time, there's been no accountability to such a degree where even in the middle of a pandemic, they basically couldn't be bothered. But as I look at this, I'm beginning to realize that the plan here seems to just let Trump be Trump and let Trump, with his incompetence, deal with an economic fallout juxtaposed against a human health crisis. Right now, we have over 80,000 people dead. We have 1,300,000, meaning more than 1,300,000 people infected. That number is only going to double. And whereas Trump thought that he might have been able to get away with blaming China, that doesn't seem like it's working. Let's hear Trump make the argument that we have prevailed. Let's play the clip.
Thanks to the courage of our citizens and our aggressive strategy, hundreds of thousands of lives have been saved. And we have saved, and if you look at on a per 100,000 basis, we're at the best part of the pack, right on the bottom. Germany and us are leading the world. Germany and the United States are leading the world. Lives saved per 100,000. In every generation, through every challenge and hardship and danger, America has risen to the task. We have met the moment.
We have prevailed. We have not prevailed. And even in that little blurb that Donald Trump gave, it wasn't entirely true because we don't necessarily have the testing that Donald Trump is trying to insinuate that we actually have. The key point here, and the thing that I think you need to understand and you need to wrap your head around, is that Donald Trump is sitting president, has the capacity to implement policy that will be to his best interests in regard to potentially winning this race. Donald Trump, basically in the pocket of the 1%, will not do that. And whereas he might have thought he was able to get away with this by skating on the notion that the reporting is showing that a large number of African Americans are being killed by this or injured by this, I think 2.3% different, or 2.3 times the amount. At the end of the day, the people who are being ill and injured are his supporters also. Especially when you're talking about the older generation who Donald Trump has basically kicked over to the side, and that generation is basically saying, 70% of which, keep it shut. To put this in perspective, the polling that have come out recently has been utterly atrocious for one Donald Trump. CNN poll came out today. The president numbers for handling the coronavirus outbreak have worsened. 55% now disapprove, up from 48% in March and 52% last month. And only 36% say they consider Trump a trusted source of information on the outbreak. By a near 6-1 margin, people 65 and older, this is Morning Consult, people 65 and older say it's more important for the government to address the spread of the coronavirus than it is to focus on the economy. Trump increasingly signal interest in prioritizing economic interests is basically undermining his polling. Morning Consult in mid-March, this group approved Donald Trump's handling of the outbreak at a higher rate than any other group, with a net approval of plus 19. Later that month, the level of support has dropped 20 points and is now lower than any group other than 18 to 29-year-olds. This group is seen in women. This group is seen in white Protestants. This is seen in Catholics. These numbers were 12-point drops all the way down the line for these various groups. Donald Trump, in this particular scheme of opening the economy with 70% of the population that is against it, the Democratic Party at this point has basically said, I will let Trump fail on his own, with one catch. Nancy Pelosi saying we're going to pass this Rooseveltian plan, knowing full well that that plan is going to get shot down by Mitch McConnell. But her reasoning for doing this has everything to do with her saying, we tried, not because they want to get anything actual accomplished. They are basically running this race under the idea that Donald Trump and his polling is going to continue to drop purely out of Donald Trump's own incompetence. Bob, it doesn't seem like the Democratic Party is trying to win this in as much as they're just letting Trump lose it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty funny because it seems like every single day they have... Yeah, I mean, it's pretty funny because it seems like every single day they have a new opportunity to go after Trump or to actually get their stuff right, where Trump just time and time again continues to put his foot in his mouth. I did want to mention there, the hearing's been quite interesting so far today, and we'll talk mostly about that in the first hour. So give us a call, 202-521-1320. But one person I thought was pretty funny early here in the testimony was one Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. At one point, Rand Paul says, quote, in rural states, we never really reach any sort of pandemic levels in Kentucky and other states. Outside of New England, we've had a relatively benign course for this virus nationwide. It's noted here that more than 81,000 Americans are now dead. I live here in Washington, D.C., which has been a hotspot. We talked about the high results there in L.A. County, and we'll talk later in the show about how it's rolling through the Midwest and a lot of states that didn't think that they were going to face the pandemic. It is coming indeed. And so here you are, Jamarl, saying basically this is going to impact Americans in every swath of the corner, every part of the nation. And yet the Democrats, in this extremely seemingly obvious moment for them to take political lead and have some courage, they continue to fall back on their old ways and not offer anything new.
It's true that they're falling back on their old ways, not necessarily offering anything new, but Joe Biden is leading in the polling. Now, I would say he should take that with a grain of salt because Hillary Clinton was leading in the polling in every battleground state and she still lost. But I do think there's something to be said for Trump's plummeting in the polling, whereas when he was going against Clinton, he for the most part just stayed stable. I think the coronavirus thing, we were debating this before, if you remember, where we was like, at some point, this has the this has the bite into Trump's numbers. And here we are. It seems to be finally starting.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate question then. Is it enough to get Trump out of office from his plummeting numbers, or do the Democrats have to offer something else instead? That is the big question. Will they be able to do that? Jamal, we do need to take our first break of the hour. Give us a call. Get on the line, 202-521-1320. In the first hour, we'll be talking about Dr. Anthony Fauci and his team's ongoing testimony to the U.S. Senate, Joe Biden's latest political attack ad, and having enough from reporters, Donald Trump walks off mid-thought from the latest White House press briefing. Things are not getting better. And if that is not enough, don't worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here.
Real opinions for real people.
So where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but We can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. We have a loaded first hour for you today, including Elon Musk's attempts to get arrested. Lord, please arrest him. Please arrest him. And of course, Joe Biden's new attack ad that basically bashes China while also bashing Trump. If you guys are digging the content, smash that like button and share this video. You can also reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So we have to start with Fauci and the Senate hearings. Now, the Trump administration blocked Fauci from testifying before the House for obvious reasons. For the obvious reason, it's run by Nancy Pelosi, whereas the Senate is run by political yes man, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. For all of Trump's best laid plans, Fauci has indicated that he will go to the Senate Education, Labor, and Pension Committee and basically tell, and these are his words, that he will make the point of warning against needless suffering and death. Now, he made the comments in an email to the New York Times reporter late Monday night. The major message that I wish to convey to the Senate HLP committee tomorrow is the danger of trying to open the country prematurely, he wrote. If we skip over the checkpoints and the guidelines to open America again, then we risk the dangers of multiple outbreaks throughout the country. This will not only result in needless suffering and death, but will actually set us back on our quest to return to normal. Now, that does sound like, for the most part, he is on script. He is using Trump's language for the plan. There's a reason Fauci is the most trusted person in the Trump administration. Part of it is that everyone in the administration is a bunch of liars. But beyond that point, there's also the penchant for Fauci to actually challenge the administration when Trump or that administration is going against science or good sense. To discuss what has the potential, or what had the potential, at least I thought, to be a spirited back and forth, we have co-author of the original Medicare for All bill, executive director of Justice Action Mobilization Network, and national director of the COVID-19 Emergency Response Group, Joel Siegel. Joel, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Well, it's great to be on. I'm glad that I heard Bob a moment ago.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
What is Trump thinking? Now, objective reality, at the very least, objective reality makes the point that this is not working. The polling across the board in various polls, be it Gallup, be it, I think it was one called PPI, be it the one for CNN recently, shows that the blame China technique is not working. And yet, here we are with him continuing to open the economy. What on earth is Trump thinking? Wouldn't this, or his campaign, make the point to him that you're going to lose the election if you keep going in this direction?
I mean, the operative word is, what is he thinking? And the question is he able to think? I don't think that he is. I don't think he's capable of thinking. He has no policy background. He's the worst president in my lifetime. Killed thousands of people unnecessarily because he never planned for a COVID-19 emergency response. The public health, tracing, testing, infrastructure with medical workers, having the PPEs. I think what he cares about is one thing. He thought he could win his reelection by saying that we had a 3.5% unemployment rate, the lowest rate in years and years and years. He wants to get back down. And of course, not when you have 30 million people out of work and more. So he just wants to, basically, he's a propagandist where he wants to show that he's putting the nation back to work because he's failed in everything else that he's done. So, he's failed on COVID-19. So maybe he can win on something. And it's the most reckless policy I've ever seen. I call it the Baton Death March, which both of you may or may not remember in history, where people were marched, American soldiers I don't remember if it was Okinawa. I can't remember what island it was, but thousands of Americans died knowingly. The Japanese just wanted to march them, to death. And it's so reprehensible and beyond the pale. I get so angry, and I think that's why people have to vote him out in November 2020 and resist and not cooperate with any of his policies, because they're literally killing us and killing the economy. A lot of the Republicans realize that our Fauci, there goes the voice of the people, there goes the voice of science and public health, and one of the experts, right, in the history of the world on pandemic diseases, and that many of their own constituents would also die as a result of not having a Fauci there to counterbalance the insanity of Donald Trump. And then second, this idea of, workers are going to have to die and seniors are going to have to die, that is no different than what the Republican Party, certainly the far right wing, right, for decades has basically said no health care for people, and if they die, they die. That's okay. If we have minority health disparities and we put black people next to coal plants and they die, that's okay. If seniors can't afford the prescription drugs and they die, that's okay. So I just find it, very consistent with Republican ideology for the last several decades, and that's people can die at the altar of capitalism and at the altar of profits. And frankly, I think people now are really getting fed up, and they're starting to see all this. And people are finally waking up and realizing that we have an old system with old people who are running it. We need a new system with progressive younger people, especially of color, running it, which is why I stayed in Congress for all the years that I did. I saw this, this sort of streak in people to sacrifice human beings for profit, whether, you're hiring so-called essential workers in Tyson meatpacking plants without, PPEs, without any kind of testing protocols, OSHA having voluntary guidelines to make sure that meatpacking plants in Iowa are following COVID-19, testing protocol and PPE protocol. And then to make matters worse, Trump says, "Oh, we're going to waive any liability rules for these corporations. If they do what's right, they can't be sued." So, I mean, it's just, we've been taken over by a combination of Putin and Mussolini, with Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler doing the press.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of the comparisons, but we've been taken over by Donald Trump and the far right. I mean, we got to focus on who our leaders are in this country, and as much as historical comparisons, I think, are warranted at times, we also have to remember that these people are uniquely bad within the U.S. capitalist system, the U.S. imperialism, that they have a unique opportunity to do things that we've never seen before, and we should be vigilant. I did also want to echo what you were saying about the meat packers there. It was fascinating watching Rand Paul, somebody who has tested positive for COVID-19 about a month ago now. I think it seemed like it's been a while ago. But him basically saying, isn't it great that these meat workers have already tested positive, have already had COVID-19, so they could now go back to work? And he was pushing Fauci on saying, well, aren't we immune now from getting the disease again? But there's no way to know these things. There's no way to know if it's going to come back in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. How long does your immunity last for? There's so many questions that we don't have answers to that still need to be addressed. Joel, I wanted to ask you, somebody who does have a long history in organizing, how do we actually move people to the electoral box. I do think there's going to be a large economic movement that unfolds over the next few years as the economic crisis, as austerity measures get pushed. I think that's coming. But at the same time, we've really seen there to be a lack of translating the frustrations people have towards policies to the voter box. And we don't have to look any farther than what happened with Bernie Sanders and public health care. Obviously, health care was overwhelmingly in favor of exit polls as people left the ballot. They said we're for this thing, but then they weren't necessarily voting for Bernie Sanders. So obviously all these people are upset at the policies being put out by Congress right now, but yet we're not necessarily seeing that as this like large left-wing shift in our political system. How do we go about organizing that change?
That's a great question. I mean, I spent 13 years of my life organizing what I called, the new progressive movement, by co-founding Progressive Democrats of America, asking Dennis Kucinich to please co-sponsor Medicare for All because I knew he was running for president, and organizing with 200 congressional briefings on Medicare for All, and town hall meetings, working on my own time to fund organizations so they could advocate for a single payer system, but also to move the Democratic Party far to the progressive direction as possible. And I didn't think it was going to really happen, but I think it has. And the work of several organizations and leaders across the country, which was a conscious, deliberate organizing strategy that started in around 2000. So in order to get people to polls, it's simple. The progressive movement, I don't think there are progressives who do organizing. I don't think we're a progressive movement, not yet. We're getting there. It's going to have meetings and national meetings. I'm actually organizing two of them right now nationally. One with Jesse Jackson and the other with Barbara Unwin, the Transform Justice Coalition in Charlotte, North Carolina. There has to be a national strategy to get people to the polls, fight voter suppression, to fight voter purging, register large numbers of African Americans, Hispanics. That's the only way that a Democrat is going to win. Old notion that the swing a good Democrat is who you have to get to in order to win.
They're going after Republicans right now. The reporting just came out that Joe Biden was basically having a Republicans for Joe Biden. And if indeed Joe Biden is getting this kind of group of Republicans, you know which way he's going to lean when it comes to the electoral contest, especially once he gets out of the primary process.
It's a very fair critique. I'm worried about it as well. I was really worried about him, Senator Klobuchar, who is one of the most difficult people to work with, but also is, in my opinion, a centrist. Joe Biden does not put together a COVID-19 emergency response plan that's progressive. It's not universal health care, jobs for all, tuition-free college, in the Medicare age to, I say 50, not 60. Say that Medicare for all is something to be seriously looked at and considered instead of him saying veto it, which was, I can't believe he said that, by the way. He'll veto it. I mean, that's what every country in the world basically does. He has to really out there onto the progressive where we are. And then also he has to have a vice presidential candidate, I think a woman of color, who is super progressive. If he doesn't do what I just said, there's a very good chance that Trump will win. A lot of people are going to stay home. If we don't have a vote by mail system, a lot of people will not go to the polls fearing a COVID-19, right? They might die from COVID-19. I think 9 people who voted in Wisconsin got COVID-19. Now it's up to the progressive movement to push Biden as far as they can to the progressive direction. That cannot be done unless progressives actually, instead of finger pointing and tweeting on how terrible Biden is, you gotta do what they did in the '60s civil rights movement to Lyndon Baines Johnson. You have to come up with a plan like the Great Society and say, all right, Joseph Biden, we will vote for you, but these are the 5 or 6 things that you have to do. And I think our revolution is doing a pretty good job. My Jeff Weaver, my buddy from Sanders' campaign, is leading.
But what if Joe Biden says kick rocks?
What I think we have to do.
If Joe Biden goes with the notion of you have nowhere else to go, and you put out these 5 plans. Look, I agree with you. My argument has been extricate yourself from the party, stand under the policy proposals. You don't care about party being, be it socialists, communists, Democrat, whatever. Just staying under this notion, do you agree with Medicare for all, yay or nay? Do you agree with the expansion of Social Security? Because the majority of the people at this point, we already know, agree with these things. By the same token, if lefties are engaging the Democratic Party again, just like they've engaged over the last 40 years, and the party tells them you have nowhere else to go, from your perspective, what should lefties in that scenario do? He's already said he's going to veto Medicare for all if it was passed.
I'm the author of Medicare for All, so of course, I grew up uninsured. I have $180,000 in medical debt. I know it's the only system that's going to work. However, I don't ever believe in allowing the perfect to be the enemy. But maniac, monstrosity of a man, Donald Trump, has got to be defeated. And I've been listening to Biden very carefully on a call with him on COVID-19, and I could check every box. He was right there, progressive. He's agreed to Warren's policy and Sanders' policy of tuition-free college if you make below $125,000. I guess that would be your family. So what I see Biden doing on climate change, he's pretty good. He's 7 million climate new jobs. He wants to transition to 100% clean renewable energy. But my understanding is that he still supports natural gas as a bridge fuel, which is a huge, huge, gigantic mistake. I hope he doesn't do that. But based on what I'm hearing from Biden, he checks enough boxes for the progressive movement, I think, to elect him. Representative Conyers, who I worked with for 13 years, used to say, look, there's two parties, Siegel. There's the Republican and there's the Democrat. I don't believe in what the Republican Party believes in. I'm closer to the Democrats. I believe in voting for the Democrat because we, as a progressive movement, have to push them as far as we can, to the progressive direction. And Obama went on universal health care. He did not. Neither did Hillary Clinton. Neither did John Edwards. There was a strategy among the single-payer movement, and this included Dennis Kucinich, where we pressured them to adopt a universal health care platform, and we won on that. That's an example of when I say we won, we didn't win. We didn't get what we wanted, but we did get the country and the Democratic Party fought universal health care for years to actually say, okay, we're going to run on it. Now we have to get to single payer. So I've actually been involved many times where we were able to successfully push not only Democrats, but even George W. Bush. You could push him. The question I would ask both of you, as two, I think, excellent commentators, is how come the 99% can't get their shit together? Oh, I'm sorry. How come the 99%?
Drop that. Yeah, I hear you on that question. Let's make sure we drop that from our radio line here as we're live on Washington, D.C. Radio 105.5. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. I think there's one big problem is that the way there's only so far you can pull a Democratic Party that's committed to capitalism, committed to destroying the environment, and committed to billionaire donors. I mean, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg of the world take dozens of billionaire donors, and these people all study at the same public policy schools across the country. And so they're only being taught such a range of policy that at the end of the day, when you say we need some democratic socialism, we need socialism, we need workers' protections, we need labor rights, none of this stuff is taught to these people at their fancy Ivy League schools or the different public policy schools across the country. And so oftentimes I think we are compromising. And I hear you, Joel, on the compromising stuff. And I'm not going to push too hard on that because you have been able to get bills through that just wouldn't otherwise get through if it was all Republicans. And we do need to have some incremental progress. But at some point, we simply need to realize that the Democratic Party can only go but so far to actually creating the policies that are needed. Not sure your full question there on the 99%er. I think people are just completely worn out. I tell the story a few times when I was in Iowa for the Democratic caucus and I was at an Amy Klobuchar event. There was all these young, affluent, white people primarily in the bar watching the Super Bowl, eating wings and having a great old time. And I walked across the street to get a sandwich at the Jimmy John's. And this poor worker who was saying he was on his double shift, getting paid less than the delivery workers, being asked to do more and more work at this Jimmy John's. He was exhausted. He was tired. I said, well, has anybody talked to you about what's going on next door? And he goes, no, not really. I just see that there's some type of campaign going on. The people don't care. The Amy Klobuchars and the people that are surrounded by her. And most of these big time politicians, I think they attract people that aren't coming from working class backgrounds, that aren't your poor people. And as much as there's a 99%er, I think there's plenty of affluent white middle class people that are in the 99% that just have no interest in actually reaching out to people of color or to people living below the poverty line per se. And so I think there's a lot of bridges to be had that still need to be made across the 99%er until there's going to be a larger movement.
Let me respond to that, Bob. It's a good point. I mean, I spent 2 years organizing uninsured people online. I worked 3 jobs because I was so angry with being kicked out of George Washington Hospital after a knee infection, which almost killed me because I was uninsured. I remember the NGOs in D.C. were against universal health care. They didn't want to do a new movement. When I got to Congress, I had the most hostile. It lasted for almost 13 years. I was treated very, very badly. A lot of staffers and a lot of members used to yell at me for doing universal health care. I didn't care. Our movement was so huge. We had over 1,000 organizations that were for single payer. We were able to get Medicaid expansion and Obamacare and take us to the road of single payer. I really believe that if you look at the growing numbers of Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, of an international minority coalition here in Charlotte, North Carolina, young people, there's just more of us than there are of them, our right wing. Bernie Sanders, I just read his book, Our Revolution. He goes to a rally, average 25,000 to 15,000 a rally. Where are those people? I posit, I'll conclude with this statement. Gandhi organized the Indian National Congress and kick out the British. If Mandela could organize the African National Congress under a brutal apartheid government, why can't we have one united front, rainbow, as funding and office that is very clear about its progressive agenda, electing our own. So you can't do that unless some of these, what I call corporate activists, get out of the way, let younger people and people who know what they're doing organize this movement. If people aren't going to be talking about a unified progressive front, Black communities of color, I can't take them that seriously anymore at age 60, having been doing this for 35 years.
Well, Joe,
just
to make a point, I mean, is it fair to say that over the course of the last, let's say, 40 years, lefties have basically been dealing with the you have nowhere else to go, and regardless of what the Democratic Party did, they lumped themselves into the party? I have to be honest, I don't necessarily know why that level of narrow focus, myopic pragmatism is beneficial, especially if you have a situation where the party itself has just moved further and further to the right. I mean, for God's sake, Obama was trying to cut Social Security. Obama gave 95% of the income to the top 1%. And I agree with you. He did pass Obamacare, but there has to be something where people are pulled into the political process because of an affirmative argument about what that particular person represents, not necessarily for putting somebody else or keeping somebody else out the office. And I would make the point that over the course of the last 40 years, the entire reason why you're asking this question about why can't we have this coalition, the majority of people, or 50%, the majority of people who don't vote, make less than $30,000 a year. Now, this is despite the fact that these people only make up a fourth of the population. Something similar is true with people of color, where you have, again, making up like a fourth of the population, but making up nearly 50% of the vote. They don't vote because they've been so disengaged from the political system, they realize that what they give to the system, meaning the support, the cash, is not necessarily remunerated from the standpoint of policy. And it hasn't necessarily been that way for the last 40 years. I think that's the answer to your question. Why can't all of these people come together under this idea and get to the polls and get to the voting booths and everything else? They're not given a reason to, and they've come to the realization that they're not getting anything for it, which is the reason why the polling gets less and less and less year after year after year. I don't agree with the blue no matter who stuff. Not only does it undermine any notion of standards and accountability in the political process that allows these guys to just get worse and worse and worse, but it also cuts down the number of people who comes and votes because those people believe that there is nothing in the political process for them. Now, am I wrong with this?
You're right. And the reason why Democrats lose races is because they run people who are all about the ability to raise cash hand over fist. The owner class and what I call the ownership class, right? Banks, insurance companies, the upper middle class who give the money. That is the problem. Their policies always appeal to that group of people. John Pascal, the great economist, called it the comfortable class. But how did the Tea Party take over the Republican Party would be the question that progressives should ask. Well, because they organized, they met, they raised money, they took over AM radio stations, they put in Rush Limbaugh and all these right-wing commentators. Once again, I will just say that a lot of the activists who are progressives, I don't agree with one of your premises, though. I don't agree that they say the Democratic Party is the only party that we have to go to. In fact, I will say that the Progressive Caucus is the strongest I have ever seen in the years and years that I used to put pressure on the Progressive Caucus to actually be progressive. I mean, Bernie Sanders would have never gotten the kind of support that he had gotten within the Democratic Party 20 years ago. We've actually made a hell of a lot of progress, but what you're saying is true. There has to be pressure on the Democratic Party, local, state, and federal races, make sure that they are running truly as progressives. You have to have a progressive PAC to do that. You have to be able to raise money and give money to candidates. I'm a revolutionary. I'm not afraid to say it for morality. And I just think that we have not done anything close to what has been done in Europe in terms of social democracy, what has been done in countries where they were being strangled by, either corporate elites or fascists or whatever. I just don't find activists to be, I call them corporate boutique activists. I don't think they're serious. I think a lot of them are serious about getting a foundation grant. They're certainly not serious about ending homelessness or ending ghettos or unemployment or Native American poverty or creating a single payer system. If they were, every activist and progressive would have a home to go to. We don't have a home. We have a corporate progressive movement. It's corporate. It's owned by the foundations, but there's still enough good people very optimistic. I don't want to sound that negative.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right on point there, Joel. And for me, we've talked about this on the show, of the need to abandon the word progressive. I think it's been completely co-opted by the Joe Bidens of the world, corporations of the world, large boutique organizers and activists who use this term progressive, but it actually has no meaning. I think we do need to turn to the revolutionaries, the radicals, and the misfits. So we're greatly appreciative of your time, Joel. We are out of time, though, with Joel Siegel. Joel, where can people find more of your work and get involved online?
The best thing to do would be to go to the COVID-19 emergency response group, and you can go to our Facebook page or our website, or you can just email me at joel, joel.r.siegel, S-E-G-A-L, @gmail.com, and that way I can have a colloquy and talk to you and email you, or you can call my number 571-344-1518. Never put yourself above the people. We're supposed to be fighting for the voiceless, the left out, the least of these, the hungry. And with 30 million uninsured and 30 million unemployed, 30 million people might have their utilities cut off and their rent. We need to fight like we've never fought before. That's why I'm trying to create this united front to protect people from COVID-19.
Yeah, very cool. Joel, we greatly appreciate your time. That was Joel Siegel. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed sound bites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We have about 15 minutes left in the hour, and we have a few stories to get to. But if you guys are digging the content, if you're digging what we're putting down, definitely smash that like button. Also share this video. And of course, you can give us a call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So Bob, it might still be hard to believe, but there's actually a presidential election still taking place at this very moment. Now, Joe Biden has been basically running the election out of his basement, so much so...
I fell asleep, Jamal. I thought it was over, but then you were talking about Joe Biden, so it made sense. Joe Biden fell asleep. We're still awake here.
During Hillary Clinton giving him his endorsement, which I thought was the funniest thing in the world to me. But Joe Biden is out with a new attack ad. He's in the basement, but he's still, he still has cash out there doing his job for him. And so he has a new attack ad going after Donald Trump. Let's play the clip, because you're going to love this ad, Bob. I think you're going to like it.
Early January, Donald Trump is first warned of the virus. He ignores it.
We have it totally under control. It's going to be just fine.
Defends the Chinese government instead. January 30th, Trump's own cabinet secretary warns of a pandemic, raising concerns that the Chinese government isn't being transparent. Trump calls him an alarmist.
We think we have it very well under control. We're working very closely with China and other countries, and we think it's going to have a very good ending for us.
The next day, the Dow plummets 600 points. Desperate to protect the stock market from sliding further, Trump continues to deny the threat and praise the Chinese government.
We're doing great in our country. China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away.
But global cases more than double, spreading to over 24 countries.
Did not have to focus on China in the way that he focused on China in that video. He could have literally made that argument without using China at all, just using Donald Trump's incompetence. He's doing that because he understands that the American public has somewhat of a dark point of view of China dealing with the economic stuff, but also the COVID-19 stuff. And Joe Biden is basically using a racist attack ad in order to attack Donald Trump, using China as basically this attack piece. I mean, am I wrong on this? This is a horrible ad.
No, you're right. I mean, it's kind of what you said. Give people something to vote for, and I don't think the Democrats have that. They have to scare you with Russia, they'll scare you with China, they'll scare you with Trump. It's all voting against, and I just think it's such an unhealthy thing for a society. I understand that most nation states revolve around hating the other, right? We hate gay people together, we hate black people together, we hate natives together. That's kind of the unifying force. And when we go to war, there's always this kind of surge in supporting the president because we can collectively hate the other. And so everything's always about the othering of people. And I guess maybe it's just harder to sell love and respect and common dignity because that's not the model we use in most of our society. Capitalism's predicated on competition and taking and getting more from others. And so all of our orientation is around othering of people. And this is incredibly dangerous for society. Jamal, I was in Taiwan for the last elections, and basically the two parties were just trying to out-hate mainland China. And you're saying to each other, like, what about your healthcare? What about education? What about jobs? What about the domestic well-being of your seniors? All of those issues get thrown out by the sideline, and then it has real consequences because that means less people are writing policies, less people are doing outreach and coalition building, less people are working on the certain messages at exchange for making these promo ads like we just heard on China. Like there's a real cost to these decisions and to our
with
politics.
that race to the bottom, you also end up with less and less people voting, and like you say, the policies basically get ignored in order for this, to use something else in order to distract or not necessarily deal with the real issues of the country. Also, there's one other thing that I kind of want to point out. They do this not because they have to. They do this because they don't want to give anything up. They have all of these tethers on them from, let's say, the 1%, the top upper echelon in regards to class. And the last thing they want to do is give concessions, because if you give concessions to lefty, you set a precedent that you gave concessions to lefties. And so, all of this is just utterly horrendous. Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself for running an ad like this. But we have other people who are also angry and not necessarily dealing with their anger all that well. Donald Trump is under all sorts of pressure. His polling numbers have been dropping across the board, in addition to basically having to deal with this difficult quagmire of an economy versus human health, and having to do so while being flagrantly incompetent. So as you can expect, this is an issue of frustration that every so often boils up, as it did yesterday. So let's hear the clip of Donald Trump basically telling an Asian reporter that she needs to deal with China to deal with the injuries to the American population in regards to death and illness, which she did not take all that well, in which Donald Trump basically just ended the press conference abruptly. Let's hear the clip.
That the U.S. is doing far better than any other country when it comes to testing.
Yes.
Why does that matter? Why is this a global competition to you if everyday Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, and behind you, please.
He basically...
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
Why does it
And
matter?
he basically ignored her.
Anybody else?
And bolted past her and eventually just left. Bob, Donald Trump is not handling this well. And basically, that wasn't an unfair question. I mean, especially when you have all of these people dying. The United States is the epicenter of this. I just checked the number of people that died. 1,392,961 infected, 82,237 dead. Nowhere else is close. So I don't necessarily think that's an unfair question for her to ask. Maybe I'm wrong. Is it an unfair question?
No, it wasn't an unfair question. And then his whole meltdown, he points at another reporter, and the reporter takes all but a second to ask her question. And he's like, "No, you're done. Next person." Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you didn't see the video, I believe it was an Asian American reporter. So that's where the question came in, that it wasn't a great question to be asking specifically to her, the White House correspondent for CBS, asking that question. No, not a good look whatsoever. We do have a caller on the line. Lamont, are you here with us?
Yes, sir.
Curious what's on your mind, or if you have any thoughts there to the president's meltdown, to maybe say the least, there at the press conference yesterday.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for taking my call, first of all. Listen, are we really surprised? I think this is just classic Trump style, deflecting tactics, where he knows he's kind of in the wrong, doesn't really know what to say. This is just classic Trumpism. I don't think anyone needs to be surprised by that. I just did really want to comment really quick on kind of the predicament that the lefties, myself being one, that we're kind of in now, because I think it's kind of boiled down to, and maybe this has been the case always, but it seems to be establishment versus anti-establishment, and me personally, I threw all my support behind Bernie Sanders, and we saw the outcome of that. So now we're kind of stuck with, okay, we've got Joe Biden here, not the best that the Democratic Party could produce. I think we could all kind of agree to that. But I do want to say one thing, though. If we go back to the 1930s, where, FDR social programs and things like that were kind of rolled out, we have to also understand that there was a large movement behind that, because I think to myself, if FDR had it his way, would he have done those things if it weren't for this kind of a mass, movement behind him, and probably not, because he probably would have been of service to the establishment of the time, I think. But so what I'm trying to say is that maybe there's a sliver of hope that we could kind of get away with this if there is that resurgence of, kind of like public, you know what I'm saying, like that force to make Joe Biden do these things, So in that sense, it is kind of like a win-win situation, because whether he's a desirable candidate or not, he still has this pressure behind him from the people, especially now that we're all kind of going through this, to do these things, to give these kinds of concessions, So kind of like putting him between a rock and a hard place, So the thing is that how big of a movement could we formulate to make this happen? But I was just curious what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, Lamont, thank you. Thank you so much for the call, Lamont. I think those are all excellent points. Jamal, I guess I'm curious, at one point, was Joe Biden the best the Democrats could come up with? Because part of my brain says, for their supporters and who runs that party, yeah, he was the best they had, and that's absolutely terrifying. I mean, obviously, I think we would say the best was Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders is a longtime independent, not a Democrat. So
yeah,
who could best uphold the Democratic Party?
Biden.
As is, it is Joe Biden. The concern I have is I just don't know if there's enough time between now and November to put the actual pressure on the Democratic Party to pressure them to the left. I feel like in many ways what you have is Joe Biden. He said he's the transition guy. He's not the guy that fixes the problem in the short 6-month window he has to build that bridge. He's saying, put me in office and then we'll build that bridge. And that's where people definitely need to not take the bait. There is no way in hell that Joe Biden gets to office and then says, progressives, come on in, we're the transition team. Once Biden is in that office, they are closing and locking all of the doors.
Yeah, this is the Netanyahu thing, right? Netanyahu's like, give me 18 months and I'll transition. No, he's not. No, he's not. And I hate to point this out, and I keep pointing this out. What leverage, what pressure do you have if these people aren't out the party? If you think back to FDR, those people were socialists, those people were communists, those people were unionists, those people weren't Democrats. And those people were calling for an actual revolution. And FDR remembered, keep in mind, this was like 10, 15 years or so when you had the Russian Revolution. So this was firmly within FDR's mind. So not only did you have this movement of people who weren't necessarily part of the party that were basically threatening revolution, he had the memory of that revolution in order to incentivize his particular point of view. We have none of that. And from the standpoint of the left pressuring Joe Biden, unless you have 5 million people outside of the party saying you will lose if you do not accept Medicare for all. Now understand, the Democratic Party, I got to be honest, I do not understand the argument at all that the Democratic Party makes where they would basically say Donald Trump is going to destroy the world. However, we're not willing to accept political concessions of Medicare for all, something that's popular to the tune of 69% in the population, in order to stop them. That is the most bizarre argument in the world to me, Bob, and yet that's the argument that they consistently make.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like if the polling shows that it's favorable. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like if the polling shows that it's favorable and it would help them get elected, exactly, and yet they choose not to then go with the polls, it clearly needs to show you that they have no interest in compromising, exactly, because they're not even willing to compromise if it's in their own interest. They're only going to do what their donor class is doing. And the people that are behind Joe Biden, we know these people. They're not some abstract people that are just waiting to hear from you so then they can then have these people have hardened ideological beliefs. They've been in those positions for a long time, and they're being paid a lot of money to advise Joe Biden. And who are we? Who's any Bernie Sanders person? You just lost. They simply say, you know what, we took the old guy falling asleep and we got him to win. Who are you to come tell us anything? Simone Sanders, we know who she is. John McCarthy, the deputy political director for Joe. I know these people. These people do not rock with activists and organizers. They're not lefties. They disdain these people. These people wear suits, fancy suits, and go to fancy galas and raise fancy dollars. They are not in the streets protesting. With Sanders people, they have a disdain for them. There is no compromise to be had. But go out there, go for it. Good luck. Bang your head against the wall. My head is sore. Tomorrow, with that, we do need to take our first end of our hour break here. We are excited. We have a whole second hour ahead of us. In the second hour, we will look at attempts to ban guns at the Michigan State Capitol building after weeks of high-powered protests. We'll also talk about sanitation workers who are in strike in New Orleans being replaced by prison labor. And like every Tuesday, we'll have our weekly Politics of Art segment. All that and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlegelberg here, kind of, sort of, with Jamal Thomas. We are social distancing, bringing you brand new shows all week from our homes. Big shout out to our engineers and the entire Radio Sputnik team for keeping us live on air. It's greatly appreciated. Maybe you're listening to us on 105.5 FM here in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. You can check us out also on the Progressive Soapbox YouTube page. Make sure to comment or like us there. And if you want to give us a call, please do 202-521-1320. You also can tweet us at Sputnik Misfits on Twitter, and we'll also get any of your comments or questions on air. We continue now into our second hour, and we're joined by my good friend Jamal DJ One Love Muhammad, host of the Love Lounge radio show on SquareOneRadio.com. Jamal, what's happening?
Hey, what's up, Bob? Glad to be on the show finally, man.
Thanks for being with us. You were on last week. A shout out to you for calling in, but it's nice to have you for an extended period of time here. Others can call us 202-521-1320. DJ One Love, I want to start with guns at the state capitol building in Michigan over the last month. As many of you remember, last month, gun-touting militia protesters spilled inside the Michigan Capitol, where armed anti-lockdown demonstrators confronted police and insisted on being allowed onto the House floor as lawmakers debated whether to extend Governor Gretchen Whitmer's emergency powers. Well, obviously that was unsettling, to say the least, to many lawmakers, including Governor Whitmer, who then moved to have guns banned on the Capitol by asking the Michigan Capitol Commission, who oversees the property, to ban weapons there. Against the will of Whitmer, the commission voted Monday to create a special panel to study whether it has the power to ban firearms in the state capitol, postponing a decision to actually ban them. John Truscott, vice chairman of the commission, said that he doesn't like seeing weapons in the Capitol, but that the commission has very limited powers and have to ensure we're not overstepping our bounds. Truscott went on to say, as unelected, unaccountable individuals, the 6 members of the commission are here basically as museum caretakers and gardeners. Should they bar guns from the premises, he says, quote, we would have an injunction filed almost immediately. Whitmer said of the ruling, there are legislators who are wearing bulletproof vests to go to their work. No one should be intimidated by someone who's bringing an assault rifle into their workplace. And so there is conversation about changing that law. I think it's long overdue, and I absolutely support the change. Jamal Muhammad, I hate to ask this question because I really hope it does not happen, but what if one of these folks pulls the trigger and there is a shooting? And if there was a shooting, do these folks then try to take over the government? Do they force folks to process unemployment payments quicker? Are they doing IRS audits? Are they making sure the trash collection happens and trains continue to run on time? What's the end goal of these protests with the guns?
Yeah, you know what, man? The crazy thing is, And let me just say this first. I'm not against guns, but I am against, these assault weapons, these automatic weapons and so forth. And the crazy thing is that anytime you bring a gun into any place, there's a possibility of it going off. So even if you're just doing what is quote unquote a peaceful demonstration, you still increase that chance by the physical presence of a gun, especially in the hands of a human being. So with that said, Bob, forbid something were to happen, we don't want this to happen to anybody. But if it did happen, I mean, what that is the correct question. What is your plan if this happens? And I mean, I'm, watching that whole thing, watching it when it came up on the news that this is what they're doing, and we in America, we have this kind of war perspective that's something you would see more so down south if it were to happen at all. Here it was in Michigan, of all places. It kind of reminds you of a lot of movies in which you've seen, in which, these militias take over the government in these dystopic settings. And a couple of movies that I've watched over the years, like Last Ship and some other movies, and you see the militias just, replace the government. What is Book of Eli? It's a perfect example. And you say, what is your goal? What is your purpose? Because we are still a functioning country. I hesitate in saying democracy, Bob, but the hypocrisy that exists in America. But we are still a functioning country. Is governed and run with in a comprehensive measure. We have to think despite the pandemic.
Yeah, Jamal, you're breaking up a little bit. So let me ask here, Jamal Thomas, it is quite scary to have to go to work with these people with the guns and not knowing if one of them will be trigger happy in a time of COVID-19. Obviously, tensions are on at an all-time high and people really are on edge. State Rep Sarah Anthony, for instance, came to Michigan's Capitol with an escort of armed black citizens last Wednesday, days after white protesters had carried out their protest. Representative Anthony said she wanted to highlight what she saw as the failure of the Michigan Capitol Police to provide legislators with adequate security during the protest, which saw demonstrators with rifles standing in the legislative chamber above lawmakers. So as people remember, they weren't able to get to the floor, but they were able to go to the viewing area above the chamber. Representative Anthony said, quote, when traditional systems, whether it's law enforcement or whatever, fail us, we also have the ability to take care of ourselves. Jamal, I guess the Bundy Ranch folks, they aren't going to then set up feeding people on those lands, right? It is this weird, I guess I just never know the end goal. And at some point, a lawmaker, kind of like a Steve Scalise-esque situation, is going to get shot, or there's going to be a shootout between these different groups. Where does it go?
Where, two of the people were killed in the car with the shootout with the cops. We've had Congress members shot. And, so let's be very clear. This is not something that is beyond the pale in regards to the U.S. politics. We have multiple shootings every day, nearly. So this is one of those things that is as American as apple pie. I think the catch becomes, and the more disturbing part of this, it's disturbing to be unsecure, regardless of where you work, outside of you being a cop or maybe a firefighter. Meaning, and the funny part is, there's a study that showed the garbage men are in much greater harm than cops while they're on the job. It's a weird thing.
Policing's not in the top 10.
And so you have the situation where people should be safe in their jobs, right? But this is doubly so for law. Meaning, if you're a Congress member, whether it's state or whether it's federal, you should be protected. And that needs to be enshrined, meaning there needs to be some level of sovereignty where the government, be it state or federal, ensures that the members of that particular government are safe. And if you can't do that, what does it mean to have sovereignty if you can't necessarily ensure that the people are safe? It's massively disturbing, and that needs to definitely be put a stop to immediately.
Yeah. Well, Jamar, you talk about sanitation workers. Let's head to the city of New Orleans, where sanitation work. We planned that one too. Sanitation workers who continue to strike over safety measures at their job. Exactly to your point. Monday, the contracted workers renewed demands for hazard pay during the coronavirus pandemic, as a major city vendor acknowledged that it signed a deal to pay their prison labor replacements less than the minimum wage outlined in its contract with the city. Yes, you heard that right. The city and its trash collecting contractor, Metro Service Group, fired the striking workers and then replace them with state work release inmates placed through a private company called Lock 5 LLC. In an arrangement outlined in state law, Lock 5 takes up to 64% of inmate pay to cover its own expenses. The striking workers, called hoppers, are employed through a staffing agency and do not have collective bargaining agreement. They say they have only occasionally received protective gear, although the sanitation company says it's amassed a stockpile of masks and gloves that it gives to workers. Pictures of the demonstrators have circulated widely on social media. In one image, they hold a "I am a man" sign that Memphis workers carried during the 1968 sanitation strike that ended with Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. DJ One Love, again, we are seeing workers rise up in this moment, but we are seeing the huge battle they are up against. On one end, these corporations will just replace workers with other workers, and in this case, more sickening, with prison labor, who has no say or at least a political voice in what is happening. We also see that labor unions do not reach temp workers or gig workers, making it all that harder to organize.
Yeah, and you know what? And you didn't mention is that with prison laborers, the company that is resourcing them is taking, I believe, like 64% of their pay or something like that.
Yeah.
So out of the money that they are getting, which is paid less, they're getting even less out of that. So they're getting something like maybe $4 an hour or maybe even less. So on top of that, it's crazy. And considering the circumstances in which they are working in, like you said, they are considered essential workers that are exposing themselves to the coronavirus. So then you have to actually man or request hazard pay on such a difficult job that is essential, that is necessary. It's unfortunate, man. And the company that let the strikers go and so forth, that's ugly as well. So right now what's happening down there in New Orleans is bad because that's one of the initial hot spots for the coronavirus, and then in particular, the Black community being exposed to highest rates down there.
Yeah, New Orleans will be forever a changed city, I think, because of this. And obviously Hurricane Katrina did a lot of the damage there. But as people continue to be pushed to the margins in that city, it becomes very hard to buy land, to buy real estate when everything is being gentrified and popped up around you. Jamal, I'm curious from your perspective here as we talk about these sanitation workers and these labor strikes and going back to 1968 to the sanitation workers strikes there. As many people talk about progress in this country, the first Black president, there is obviously been a lot of progress, and let's not be short-minded on that. But at the same time, when you look at the Kerner Commission, what it talked about home ownership among Blacks, labor rates amongst Blacks when it comes to pay of cost, none of those things have moved over the last 50 years. And here we are pretty much in this exact same situation as Dr. King's organizing of the sanitation workers
Economics.
in 1968.
I mean, that's what
and here we are in 2020.
Boils down to. The Democratic Party, and you can even make an argument the Republican Party, chose identity in order to kind of eschew issues of class. So the argument for class basically got thrown out the window as basically an impolite conversation to have. When really, that's the conversation you should have been having, considering, like you said, this is going all the way back to Martin Luther King holding the sign saying, "I am a man." And we're at 2020, where we're in similar economic straits of people doing the exact same thing. I got to be honest, that's utterly disgusting what they were doing. I mean, those sanitation workers deserve that hazard pay. And the notion that they can use prison labor as scabs and those people have no say-so in doing that prison labor. I mean, basically, these guys are paid, I guess you could say they're better than making 8 cents an hour, which was what Kamala Harris in California was paying people. But this is utterly disgusting that they're willing to fire people for hazard pay like this when they entirely deserve it. But here's the catch, and last point. It's a corporation. And corporations, if they could save a nickel by shipping a job overseas or firing a worker, they'll do it. And so, it's not shocking that they did it, even though it comes across as just being utterly gross, considering what's going on right now. And these people, just like many others, are going to need to pay for their food, family, and all of this other stuff. And right now, this corporation basically made the choice to hire prison labor. That's so gross.
Yeah. I mean, if there was ever an argument to allow for folks that are incarcerated to maintain their voting rights, it's stories like this, because there still has to be part of the political and economic system. So they're political and economic actors without a voice. So regardless of what they did, why should they lose their right to vote? If you're going to say they don't get the right to vote, then they shouldn't be able to be hired
and receive
out
minimum
and
wage, by the way, Bob,
to these corporations to do their labor. Yeah, and have some of that 67% of it stolen from them along the way. So shout out to Maine and Vermont for allowing their inmates to continue voting. DJ, one love. We were talking earlier about the rush to get the economy back open. And in many ways, obviously, it's for these large corporations and for the wealthy to maintain their ownership of labor. It seems like on another end of things, the longer the economy stays shut, the longer it's frustrated, the more and more angry and upset people are, the more strikes we're going to see, that the more overall affront to the overall system will take place. And so it seems like not only are they in a rush to get the economy back open, but the longer it stays closed, I think the more it exposes itself just how broken and unfair it is.
Yeah, and this is a very delicate situation that we're working with, because, I've been paying attention to a lot of the internet chatter, as well as what is out there in the media regarding what should be open versus the risk of opening things. The economy is very fragile. To be honest, it always has been. It's just masked by profits for these corporations, and America's been hiding behind the flag of what we would call a strong nation. But, Bob, we talked about it on your show, and plenty of others will talk about it as well, with the disparities in between the wealth gap of the rich and the poor just getting wider and wider, in particular over the past 20 to 30 years. This is what's happening. And so you have a lot of people that are living below, the working wage that used to be something that people could actually live off of, where, one person in the family had enough money to take care of a house, own a house, take care of a family, a couple of kids and so forth. Now it's taking 2 or 3 people in a household just to pay the rent and the mortgages and so forth. So it's become extremely fragile with the inflation rates and so forth. And I don't know, man. This is a very trying time. We're going to have to see how this all works out. But opening the doors to a lot of these places just for the money versus what we're facing as far as the pandemic and the deaths, it's difficult. But a lot of people have been saying this for a long time now. The majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck prior to this whole coronavirus thing. Yeah. And so when something like it's like, whoa, this is a major exposure of how fragile our government and our economy is.
Well, let me ask you more about that, because that is the next topic I wanted to get into, is this idea that the coronavirus is somehow exposing disparities between our public health systems and poor and people of color. That this idea that obviously it's going to impact folks that are in low income situations that may possibly have multiple people in one house because of poverty. In Washington, D.C., for example, at least 30 Latino residents of the district have passed away from COVID-19, and Black residents, who make up 80% of the people who have died from the disease, are just 46% of the population. Latino residents have the highest incident of coronavirus infection per capita in the district at 1,200 per 100,000 people. The rate for Black residents, 820 per 100,000, and for whites, 175. 1,200, 820 for Blacks and Hispanics, and 175 for white residents. And these numbers, of course, will be much higher when we have extended testing. Megan McCarrick of Many Languages, One Voice, an organization that advocates for immigrant communities and street vendors in D.C., said, quote, we have been seeing situations where whole households are getting sick and the public health infrastructure is just not responsive to how our communities communicate. So we have people who the basic meaning of what is it to keep quarantine has not really been getting through. DJ One Love, I don't want to discourage folks from pointing out the disparities of how the virus is impacting these poor communities and Black and brown people, but it's very frustrating in many ways that the current topic is being siloed, as if the same communities are not going to face the brunt of any health crisis or climate change or police brutality or the symptoms of poor education or any economic downturn. It almost feels like by only focusing on the impact of COVID-19, we miss the forest for the trees.
Absolutely, Bob. And the thing is, once again, prior to COVID-19, we had disparities when it came to race in the District of Columbia as well as across the country. So if you look at incarceration rates, if you look at even just the policing areas, you can go with marijuana and so forth in DC.
No, marijuana they did studies, they showed it's 50% usage Black and 50% usage white, but the rest were 90% Black.
Exactly. And the irony of it is that got it on the DC map. You can look at the highest rates. I think it was close to 90% was wards 5 overwhelmingly on the east side of Washington, D.C. And that was the amount of arrests. But the amount of confiscations in grams that were confiscated from marijuana in D.C. was closer to like 80% were in wards 1, which was like overwhelmingly majority white. So, once again, you're looking at policing, you're looking at healthcare, the circumstances with healthcare, in the numbers, it's in particular with the Black residents in D.C., looking at diabetes, HIV and AIDS, cancer, heart disease, et cetera. Even infant mortality rates with Black women, they're way higher if you look on the west side of D.C., which is, once again, you can say that Wisconsin Avenue on up in particular, majority white, is much lower. So it's not a surprise to see that these numbers with COVID, and whether it be the number of infections or deaths, are much higher within the Black and Latino community, as it follows suit with everything else in life. And in particular with COVID, it is just a representation of the other health disparities that exist prior to this pandemic. So it's not a surprise at all. We cannot lose focus on those issues and those facts. And the other thing about that, Bob, is that when you look at the people that are considered essential workers, a lot of the poor people have to go to work, and a lot of the jobs that are essential, such as sanitation or customer service jobs like in the supermarkets and bus drivers and so forth, those are majority people of color. So they're going to be exposed a lot more because they do have to go to work and they do have to pay their bills, and they're deemed essential. There's a lot of people that don't want to go to work and they end up losing their jobs because of not going to work, but because they're deemed essential, but they didn't want to go to work because they didn't want to get infected.
People, and you can give me a number, kind of like if you were choosing the number of jelly beans in a container in order to get a prize. How many black people have to die before African Americans start basically revolting about this? And I don't mean, burning down buildings or anything else, but I do mean the party that they give their support to the tune of like 90%, the Democratic Party, has basically given Republicans everything that they wanted. And you have blacks dying 2.3 times higher. I mean, there was one stat that made the point that if blacks died at the same rates as whites, that 9,000 more African Americans, 9,000 more human beings will still be on this particular planet. And yet, they don't necessarily hold the party responsible for it, despite giving support to 90%. I guess I'm asking, what is that number where people start to say, you know what, this is unacceptable that we're dying in this high number, and the party that's supposed to represent our interests in the political space, that's supposed to deal with this from the standpoint of policy, is not? When do African Americans rebel over this? And I know you can't answer that question absolutely. It's more of a question where you can talk about, but I know you can't give a specific number, but I think you get the gist of where I'm going with that. Basically, with everything that's taken place in regards to the number of us that are being adversely affected, there doesn't seem to be a political solution. Definitely not in the Republican Party, which I have no expectations of. And to be honest, I don't even have a huge number of expectations in the Democratic Party, but looks like you would at the very least pretend. Jamal?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and that's a question that I have been asked for the last almost 30 years now, is what does it take to, because these numbers are not new. This is not something that just materialized over the past couple of years or even under the Obama administration. This is going back for decades and decades. I mean, prior to we had these disparities, but then in particular in the newer age of post-segregation, we've seen these numbers increase. And here's a great question that I've been asked, because me personally, I have been extremely critical of the Democratic Party, and and I don't expect anything from the Republican Party, but I have asked, why do we keep giving our votes to the Democratic Party under these circumstances? And then, you look in the past 5 to 7 years since Trayvon Martin and Black Lives Matter movement and so forth, you have to even ask, because you've seen very little done on any level when it comes to discrepancies within race in America for Black people, whether it's health, economics, or it was incarceration, or safety, education, you name it, across the board. We have been failed by our government, and in particular, if Black Americans are voting so highly for the Democratic Party, you have to ask them, what are you ever going to do, and what is it going to take for us, as you asked, to say enough is enough? Some people have been waking up about it, but a lot of people still are so dedicated to the Democratic Party, and you haven't seen any results. I mean, even in particular, I'm calling out the Congressional Black Caucus on this. What have they done in the past 15 to 20 years to address these disparities? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I think as long as we are being lied to and told that there's equality because, I can go and shop and buy my Jordans, or I can go and buy a chicken sandwich at Popeyes or whatever. And a lot of people are satisfied with that, but the numbers are extremely troubling. And it does raise the question, when is it going to take for us to wake up? Because any type of negative situation, we get hit the hardest, and it's been consistent across the board. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take and how bad does it have to get for them to wake up, for us as Black people, wake up, I should say. But it is something that we should be asking, and we should be demanding that these things be addressed. And if they're not, then you don't get our votes, you don't get our money, you don't get our support until you address these issues.
Yeah, I'm curious how much identity politics has played into slowing any type of rebellion against the Democratic Party. Because, look, the Republican Party's many of the Candace Owens they can find. There's just not that many Black people out there to go speak for the Republican Party. But obviously the Democratic Party, the Congressional Black Caucus, can go out there and say, no, we're the Democrats, we're fighting for you. And people who are checked out of the political system or who are just disenfranchised in so many different ways, they'll see somebody that looks like them and they say, well, they probably have the best of my interest in hand because they seem like me a little bit. And so it seems like the Democratic Party, Jamal, has been really good about basically playing identity politics and deflecting away from any criticisms by pointing blame at others. I think that's a huge hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, it is. And I think that they've mastered playing to the Black community's emotions. The optics is that, when you look at the Democratic Party in representation, is very diverse, so we feel that we're included because we can visually connect with that, versus when you look at the Republican Party, it's consistently across the board. You see maybe one or two people of color, period, let alone Black people. So it has played a whole lot into it. But the reality is the optics. The results don't equal what we see, and like I said, that was the Obama administration. You look at it, the first Black president, and he couldn't even make a comment that if Trayvon Martin, if he had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin, and and that's just the reality, that if he did have a son, he would favor Trayvon Martin. And that covers so much backlash. And we've just had the slaughter or lynching, that you want to call it, in Georgia, and the other situation in Indianapolis just in the past couple of months, and we're seeing the same thing happen over and over again. And once again, I think they have mastered the connection visually between, if we put blackface, and no pun intended, in with us, that they'll continue to believe us. But it's like, how many times do you keep on falling for the same trick? It is a great question, because
and I guess on the other end of things too. The Washington Post had just a disgusting hit piece on the council member in Southeast in Ward 8 of Washington D.C., which is one of the last homes of Black folks here in the nation's capital. And the council member was basically saying, if a vaccination came out for COVID-19 like in the next few weeks, I wouldn't necessarily rush to tell people to take it. And we had a doctor on the show say the same thing. These vaccinations are highly complex. They take a long time to be developed. And the history of how this U.S. government has treated Blacks and used different medical science on Black people as basically lab tests to try it out on people, there's a lack of trust and there's a lot of suspicion towards the government. So you're asking people that have been disenfranchised and brutalized by the U.S. government to then engage in the government at the same time when they've gotten so little out of it. And so you also have to figure out and incentivize people what they get out of it in order to move them. With that, though, we are out of time, unfortunately, with Jamal DJ One Love Muhammad, host of the Love Lounge radio show on SquareOneRadio.com. Jamal, is there anything else we can do to promote your work, or where people can find you beyond SquareOneRadio.com?
Yes, just go to the lovelounge.com. That's spelled LUVLOUNGE.com. That's my main website. It's The Love Lounge. You can find out more information about me as a DJ, or me as an activist, and just me as a person.
I can recommend DJ One Love if you need a DJ for your wedding. Greatly appreciated that. With that, we turn to a quick break before coming back with our weekly Politics of Art segment. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live.
Let's have a good show.
Robots by any means necessary.
Thank you.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber here, sort of, kind of, with Jamarl Thomas. Very excited for this week's Politics of Art segment, which we bring you every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A really interesting topic, to say the least. We're going to discuss decorative and applied arts and how they are appreciated, and the artists we are talking to work in those fields. We're excited to be joined by our one and only producer, Michelle Whitty, to talk more about this week's topic. Michelle, thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, thanks for having me and letting me talk about one of my sort of pet subjects.
Absolutely. Take it away.
Sure. I wanted to talk about this because I lived in Central Asia for a couple of years, and one of my favorite things about being there was being surrounded by all of these beautiful traditional arts. I was in Kazakhstan, and the Kazakhs were big felters, leather workers, embroiderers, metal workers. And I remember walking once through a museum with a friend and looking at this stunning saddle that had leather work, embroidery, metal work. And my friend made a comment about how doing all of this embellishment must have been a great way to pass the time during the long winters there. But I think that it's something more than that. I feel like if you are working on an object that is absolutely crucial to your life, and this saddle was from a period of time when the Kazakh people were nomads, and so this would have been like a piece of gear that is really kind of live or die. I feel like if you are spending enough time with that object to make it beautiful, then you're also spending enough time with it to know if any part of it starts to wear down or if there's any kind of flaw that you need to address. And so like the beauty and the functionality to me become one. And I think in our society, we've really allowed ourselves to think of beauty and decoration as something that can either be applied on top of something or taken away. And I don't think it really works that way. I think you see, like when we take away this beauty and attention to our household goods and clothes and things like that, what you end up is just with a bunch of crap you don't care about and you don't pay attention to. And so I think that there is a sort of fundamental unity in beauty and utility that we so often ignore. And so like sometimes these decorative arts and applied arts get ignored in favor of fine art. And so then also we have on top of that these cultural traditions and identities that go into some of this work. And so I don't know, I think it's just a fascinating interconnection. And we also, of course, have the connection between commerce, because the two women who we're talking to today also make their living doing beadwork. So that's my little preamble about why I think this is such an interesting topic. But we do have two guests to talk to us today who know a lot more than I do. Joining us to talk about the intersection of politics, art, culture, and commerce are two Native women and beadworkers, Renee Alphadelit, the artist behind Penobscot Designs, and Carrie Moran McCleary, the artist and owner of Plains Soul. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thank you.
So, Renee, since you told me that you were nervous, so I'm going to make you talk first. Can you tell me about beadworking traditions in the Penobscot Nation and how you ended up becoming a beadworker?
So, the beadwork within the Penobscot Nation, as you were just mentioning previously, it was making utilitarian objects beautiful. You know, the garments, the moccasins, beadwork can be found in the museum dating back to centuries of Penobscot beadwork. So I actually came to beadwork through our Penobscot ambassador, Molly and Dana. I had seen her wearing a pair of beautiful earrings, and I just wanted to really connect and get in touch with that side of my identity. My father is Native, my biological father. He's a member of the Penobscots, and he's also an artist. But I didn't grow up on the reservation, on the Penobscot reservation. I actually grew up with my mom's side of the family, which is French-Canadian living in Maine. So I used this opportunity of learning beadwork to really get in touch with the cultural side that I felt had been missing from my life up until this point.
And did it work? was it a good way to make a connection? Did it help you make other connections?
Yes, I've actually initiated contact with my biological father. I've garnered supplies for my beadwork through cousins, and I've just started to grow the relationships that for 40 plus years, I've been missing out on. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. And Carrie, your website, Plain Soul, it mentions growing up among mothers and grandmothers who were all undercover artisans and making clothes and quilts and household items. So can you talk about how those undercover artisans actually inspired you and what role they played in keeping these skills alive and in leading to you taking some of this on?
Do a lot of beadwork or sewing. I did sew my own clothes as a young person, but once you become a mother, it changes your whole life, clearly. And so just my kids in dance outfits, parade outfits, and even everyday clothing, I really took care in making my son's Western shirts. At the beginning of every school year, we had, unique yokes and wonderful pockets, and I would, source great snaps. But I was so busy with just the idea of working and being a mother that I really didn't get to pursue art seriously until my daughter went off to college, my youngest child. I think it's hard for me to separate the idea of, you were saying decorative arts and fine arts. I was discussing this with my daughter last night. I said, I just don't understand how people differentiate that. And, what it's really a settler concept. That's a non-native concept to separate. We don't separate everything. Every utility item for every day is possibly decorated. And you do that out of care and love for your family. Spend hours and hours embellishing items, even if it's an everyday item, but especially for specific events and festivals and ceremonial items, we want them to be special, and it's showing our love to the rest of the community that we would take the time to adorn this child on their horse. The horse has everything beaded. The child has everything beaded because we love them that much. We care that much for our family.
Yeah, it's a really powerful display of attention, which is something that feels in really short supply these days. I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel like my attention span is gone. And so I do think a lot of art is actually just putting in the work, which is kind of beautiful because in a way that it makes it feel accessible, once you realize that for at least some tasks, you don't necessarily have to be born some kind of genius. You just have to be willing to sit down and put in the hours.
I think that's true, and I think a lot of what happens with fine arts is that 150 years, and suddenly these blue chip galleries that control the art world will decide that now it's fine arts. So, collectors that have funding to go forth and art are looking for an 1880 Lakota cradle board for their Jackson Hole home or their Aspen home, instead of maybe asking their art dealer to look a little further into it and support a modern day artist, a Wendy Red Star, who's creating these beautiful photographic exhibits off the country, rather than an Edward S. Curtis photograph that has nothing to do with anyone's indigeneity. So I hope that continues to change. I think it is getting better. I think people are getting a better notion about creation and about appreciating artists today in the market.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you both about this, and I'll ask you first, Carrie, and then we'll turn back to you, Renee. So where that sort of brings in the idea of commerce, right? Because you are a working artist and you want to sell your product. And actually, I liked it on your website. You say like you want to unite streetwear and native design, and you want non-native people to feel free to buy these designs and wear them, and not worry about appropriation. So it's interesting to talk about like what. I don't know, like what work is for sale and what work isn't for sale. Who should buy some of this art and who shouldn't, and how you navigate some of those considerations.
So, that's a great question. I do have a lot of people come into my booth, when we're set up at a show, and they're so sweet, and they say, now, how can I wear this, or what can I do that's not appropriative? And what they're really saying is it okay do what you do and wear what you wear and not feel bad about it, which is great that they're asking. So it's church and state. You can't wear something sacred. You can't take our designs and put them on something you're creating. So if you took a photo of the Mona Lisa and started putting it on T-shirts and selling it, clearly you would have, some kind of international consortium after you for copyright. So there's no difference between our tribal designs and that Mona Lisa. That's intellectual property. They are not allowed to do that, and that needs to be clear. But as to wearing items, I'm putting it on my website. It's beadwork, it's jewelry, it's everyday items, a beaded hat. Not a sacred item. It's not a war bonnet. It's not a pipe bag that you're going to suddenly wear on your hip. So it's common sense, I guess, in a way.
It doesn't sound that complicated. It sounds like, there are some things that are off limits and some things aren't, and the lines between them are pretty strong.
Yeah, religious items, no. You can't take the Catholic priest vestment and, rock it. You go for coffee every day. So you can't take, there's so many items that people take. It's hard to, a ceremonial item and try and turn it into a backpack or, put that picture on a coffee mug and start selling it. It's against the law.
And Renee, when you began working full-time as a beadworker, what kind of process did you go through for deciding what was going to be commercial and perhaps what wasn't?
I make earrings mostly. So I always set out with the mindset of wanting to have my work out there to adorn women. I say women with an X, I'm inclusive. The amount of feedback that I've gotten, most of my sales are to Indigenous women, but I do, I'm proud to have non-Indigenous women wearing my earrings as well. But I've always come to my creations with the mindset of empowerment, wanting people to feel good about themselves, to rock a pair of earrings and just have that power emanate from them into society and give them the confidence to walk around. If they're Indigenous, say, yeah, I'm Native, I'm Indigenous, and this is my culture. And I appreciate when non-Natives wear my earrings because they're able to start a conversation. I've had a few people come to me and say they've been asked about my earrings, and they're able to start a conversation about, this is a Penobscot designer. With every pair of my earrings, I send a little bit of information on the history of the Penobscot name. So they're able to relay that information. And I just think educating people about supporting Indigenous artists and we're still here. We're still working. We still are in our craft, that things aren't just in the museum. I think
Renee, I'm curious. What would you consider to be the responsibility of an artist, especially regarding the work that you guys do? I mean, I know for my channel, it took me a while to figure out what I was. And eventually I came along this notion that there's an element of art, there's an element of news, and that integrity matters in both. So how did you guys come to, I guess, your own judgments about what was necessary in regards to your responsibility as an artist as you guys produce and promote your work?
I think that my responsibility is to be authentic, to let people know that, I'm learning along this path, just as so many other people are, and also to be willing to stand up for other Indigenous artists and to call out the people who are the frauds or the make-believers. And also to use your work for good. I've a lot of Native artists and beadworks have, donated their items for causes like missing and murdered Indigenous women and the water protectors and et cetera. So it's just along the continuum of learning and growing, being able to protect others and offer your voice to help bring awareness to the issues that are affecting the Indigenous and Native communities.
And what do you think about some of the health of these traditions? Is there increasing interest in it? Do you see young people in both of your communities taking up some of these artistic traditions and either deciding to earn a living with them or simply continuing them in their households? How do you see the future of some of these arts?
Who's answering?
I can answer. Well, you go next, Renee. So I live on the Crow Indian Reservation. My tribe doesn't actually have a reservation. I'm Little Shell Chippewa. And so my children have a very mixed history with, so they're representing both the Crow and the Chippewa heritage. My son is married to a Crow tribal member. So, my grandkids are really mixed in their tribal designs that they're interested in. But they know it's in our everyday lives. They see it every day and they practice. My 6-year-old granddaughter, she'll sit here and bead while I'm beading. And may not be she's beading, a project from start to finish. She has an interest. She understands. She sees the colors I'm using. We're not a vanishing race. We are still here. We are not going anywhere. Me getting up in the morning is an act of resistance. Me practicing the same art that my family has practiced for hundreds of years is an act of resistance. And, me being able to make a living out of something that the government tried so hard to erase from our people is, next level cultural warfare. I love it. It's still here, going anywhere. Our art's not going anywhere. It may be a little changed because families have mixed tribal identities, but it's not diluted. It's not eliminated in any way from those relationships.
Yeah, Renee, we just have about a minute left. I would love to hear your answer. And if you could tell us a little bit more about how we can find your work with Penobscot Designs online.
Yes. So I'm in total agreement. I think anytime that somebody has reached out to me to learn about beadwork or to have a tutorial, I'm always open and hit me up in direct messages. And I'm right now based off of Instagram. I do most of all of my work through Instagram, and that's through Penawetskewee Designs, which is PENAWAPSKEWI_designs.
Fantastic. And Carrie McCleary, the artist and owner of Plains Soul, where can people find more of your work online?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I have a website all under Plains Soul. LAINSWL.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Renee Alfadelat with Penobscot Designs and Carrie Moran McCleary, the artist and owner of Plains Soul. A fascinating conversation. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. With that, we take one last quick break here. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, kind of, sort of, still with Jamarl Thomas. We're here with you for 8 more minutes, and then hang on to your seats because we got some great programming coming your way the rest of the afternoon on Radio Sputnik. Right after our show from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you have By Any Means Necessary, followed by Loud and Clear and the Critical Hour to round things out. So make sure you're checking us out on 105.5 FM, SputnikNews.com. You can listen to us live there. Or if you want to see Jamarl's beautiful face, check us out on YouTube on the Progressive Soapbox, and make sure to like and comment our work there so we can continue to grow our crew of political misfits around the world. Jamarl, I was reading here, the last few pieces of news for me today have to do with coronavirus testing, which was obviously a big theme earlier in the day as Anthony Fauci and others from the White House task force were at the Senate. And it basically made it sound like they weren't sure if they could afford it. They were trying to get all sorts of tests. They're trying to get contract tracers. And then I read this news, Wuhan, China, to test all 11 million residents for coronavirus in 10-day span. Wait, what? We can test 11 million people in 10 days? So in China, I mean, not much more to the story than that. There's been some local transmitted cases in Wuhan. They've only had one new infection over the last few weeks, and so they're doing quite well with it, but they're going to make sure that everybody is free of the virus and that they can basically say the coast is clear in Wuhan. I mean, an incredible story in many ways. And Jamarl, I mean, you go back to the initial response that Americans had to what China was doing in Wuhan, and people were freaking out because there were stories that apartment buildings were getting deadbolted, locked shut, and there was people with welders out there locking doors. And here they are after 4 weeks of a lockdown, being able to eventually reopen the entire province as well as test all 11 million people. Who are we as Americans?
We're exceptional, Bob. We're exceptional in our inability to actually test people and actually get the equipment and actually get the resources that we need, despite the fact that we could spend $1 trillion modernizing our nuclear weapons, or send ships all around the world on a whim, or spend like $1 trillion just for the military on a whim without little to no debate on this. But you have a situation like this, China, 10 days, millions of people in a heartbeat. The United States, not so much.
Yeah. And it feels like the United States response was a lot like the NBA when they were like, maybe we just won't have people in the stands. That will solve it, right? And then the players started to infect one another. And now we see there's this leaked report from the White House, undisclosed data, basically talking about the future of the virus in the United States. And they named top 10 areas that recorded surges of 72% or greater over a 7-day period compared to the previous week, Jamarl. And they include Nashville, Tennessee, Des Moines, Iowa, Amarillo, Texas, and atop the list with a 650% increase, Central City, Kentucky. But according to Ron Paul, the senator earlier from Kentucky, he said the coast is clear, open things back up. The virus started on the coast, the West Coast in California and Washington, obviously one of the states hit the hardest. It's rolled through New York, and it seems pretty obvious that it's now going to spread across the heartland.
50%. Put that in perspective. If you're wondering why Donald Trump's approval rating and everything else is taking a hit, or his polling in regards to his handling of the virus, in regards to 11 consecutive polls where he's underwater in regards to favorability, and for that matter, losing to Joe Biden in many of these polls. It's this. I mean, basically you have a situation where initially Trump might have been able to skate on this notion that a large number of African Americans were affected, and so it wasn't. But that wasn't the case. African Americans only make up 13% of this population. Even if you have an outsized number, you still have a majority of whites that are being affected. And when you get into the notion of the elderly, you have Trump trying to reopen the economy, where the elderly are basically saying, you're putting my life on the line. And you have a heartland where 72% increases, 650% increases. There's no way a president could sustain that and just basically blame another country for his own incompetence and get away with it.
Well, just watch him try, Jamal. Just wait. What else is there to say? And it's additional cities that didn't necessarily meet the top list of places that will also be hit. The people that didn't meet the first criteria set but met the second: Charlotte, North Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha, and Lincoln, Nebraska, Minneapolis, Montgomery, Alabama, Columbus, Ohio. I mean, it's everywhere, Jamal. There's going to be no hiding from it for Donald Trump. It's one thing it happens on the coast, and this goes back to kind of what you said, right? Like, is it impacting his base? And if it hits the coast, California, New York, not Donald Trump and the Republicans' base, but when it starts to hit Omaha, when it starts to hit parts of Ohio, Alabama, these are states that Trump desperately will need to win and hold. And if all of a sudden your loved one, your family member, your neighbor is getting sick with the virus, and we're talking about a second wave coming,
and keep in
if
mind,
that carries through
all
the
of these
fall,
people
there is no hiding
immunity. Even Rand Paul, they don't know that. They don't know that. The fact that you were infected with it doesn't necessarily give you immunity from other mutations of the virus. And again, I make the point that the virus that initially started off, I mean, there's cases of this in France going all the way back to like December. Like, so the mutation of the virus that's been taking over the United States and been taking over the EU and so forth may be different strains, especially from the starting strain, meaning you can be reinfected. Just because you got infected once doesn't necessarily mean they know you have herd immunity the second time around.
Yeah, a lot more to be learned. I think it was even like November, December, that France had a case when it wasn't even reported into China until I think like the early to mid-December. So a lot more to be had there. But Rand Paul spoke like an expert. Apparently, if you have COVID-19, then you know everything there is to know about science and coronaviruses. So not a great expert. And it's scary too, Jamal, because the things that need to be done, mass scale testing and the hiring of contact tracers, still not being not happening at the clip it needs to take place. NPR did a study, and they found there was about 66,000 people that have been hired to be tracers of the coronavirus. So if you catch the virus, then the idea is to call everyone you came into contact with and stop the spread. And we need up to 300,000 people, what some people there at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are saying we actually need. So a long haul ahead. Jamal, with that, though, unfortunately, we are out of time. A big thank you to all of our guests, Renee Alfadat, Carrie Moran McCleary, Joel Siegel, and DJ One Love for joining us today. A big shout out, as always, to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team. Big thank you to our producer and guest interviewer today, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, I appreciate all of you joining us for the show as always. We are going to have, I am going to have contributor appreciation, if not today, at the very least tomorrow. Today is a treatment day, and on treatment days, I usually am dragging ass. But nevertheless, we will be having it this week. That will not be something that we miss. We've turned that into almost like a religious experience to make sure that we have it. Also, you will be seeing me later on in the day, as we get some more shows in. I see something called a troll. All right, Garden, who's pissing you off where you've had to block them? Oh, I see. Order of Chaos You've been on this channel for a very long time. Everybody chill. Everybody calm down. Take a deep breath. Shit happens. We're a family-ish. Electronic family. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys later today. Thanks all.